Breaking Bad and its associated shows broke prestige television with the story of how a man goes from Mr. Chips to Scarface. With a sequel movie and a prequel series every bit as good, we've compiled a comprehensive list of Easter eggs and references in the Galeverse. Breaking Bad has what's widely considered to be an iconic opening. Walter White, who would go on to build an empire as the criminal mastermind Heisenberg, walks in a pantsless panic into the desert. Everyone remembers this scene, but have you ever wondered what happened to those pants? No? Well, the season 5 episode Ozymandias answers that question anyways. As Walter pushes a barrel through the desert, he passes a pair of filthy ancient pants lying in the sand. It's a great Easter egg and a reminder of how far he's come. Speaking of iconic, Gustavo Fring is one of TV's greatest villain, and his demise remains one of the most memorable moments in the entire show. After being blown up by his old rival Hector Salamanca, Gus calmly walks away only to reveal that he's missing half of his head. This moment is actually foreshadowed, though it's actually tucked into another piece of foreshadowing. Before the plane collision over Walter's house, we see ghostly images of fallen debris, including a bear with half of its face missing, just like Gus. That's twice the foreshadowing at half the price. Walter White's arc over the course of Breaking Bad is legendary. Watching a regular guy become a vicious drug kingpin is fascinating, but it's also kinda sad. Over 5 seasons, you see a nice family guy turn into a dark and terrifying figure. This change in Walt's morality is mirrored in his wardrobe, as Walt wears darker and darker tones throughout the series. The show also famously had colors closely associated with different characters, like Murray with purple, and associated certain colors with certain themes like pink and death. The next one is a small one, but we think it's worth mentioning. Walter Jr., Walt's son, isn't seen a lot on the show, especially in the later seasons. When he is seen, he is usually at breakfast, and much of his personality has to be extrapolated from there. In an internet-famous scene from the 2nd season, Jr. complains to his mother about her buying the wrong cereal. She bought Raisin Bran when he wanted Raisin Bran Crunch. "It's not that hard, Mom, it says Crunch on the box." 3 seasons later, Raisin Bran Crunch is seen on the breakfast table. Junior's patience seems to have finally paid off. Like many of the entries on this list, this observation can be traced back to dorkly writer Tristan Cooper, who is truly an eagle-eyed viewer. Saul Goodman is a fan-favorite character from Breaking Bad and turned out to have enough depth to carry his own show, the excellent and underrated Better Call Saul. His show is named for the slogan of Saul's legal practice, which begins to represent Walt and Jesse in the 2nd season. But before Saul ever appears on screen, his arrival is hinted at when Jesse's friend Badger has a discussion with a friend. On a bench behind them, unnoticeable at the time, is Saul's image. Speaking of background details in the set decoration, a more subtle Easter egg actually appears on the floor of the hospital set seen throughout the show. If you look at the tiles of the floor in the hospital, you can make out a familiar pattern. The green tiles mimic the tiles from the opening of the show, with 2 diagonal green panels. It's amazing to think that this level of detail went into nearly every level of production. Jane's demise is one of the most tragic moments of the entire show. Even if you believe that Jane would prevent Jesse from beating his addiction as Walt did, she did not deserve to choke on her own vomit. But Jane's shocking death may seem less shocking if you watch the show a second time. It was heavily foreshadowed multiple times throughout the 2nd season. First, when Jane turns Jesse on his side to prevent him from vomiting. Then it's referenced in a flashback when she jokes about vomiting in her mouth. Dark stuff. Closer to the end of the series, Jesse Pinkman was haunted by the hit Walt ordered him to carry out and the memory of his victim, Gale. Gale, the cheerful chemist who never really bothered anybody, remains on Jesse's mind long before his demise, and twice the series reminds us of them. First, when Jesse is playing a video game, Gale can clearly be seen written backwards on a wall. Later still, the sign for Lydia's company Madrigal appears to spell another backwards Gale. Gale lives. Shine on, you crazy diamond. One of the first times we realize the true ruthlessness of Gustavo Fring is in the series of flashbacks set in Mexico. In one of his most famous moments, Gus poisons an entire party of cartel members using a bottle of bad tequila. This plan is actually set up much earlier in the show, during Gustavo and Don Eladio's first meeting. Gus clearly notes Don's affinity for tequila, and supposedly reasons that he might be blinded by the offer of a great bottle. He was definitely right. Despite his name appearing in every episode of the show, Vince Gilligan is not a very public figure, staying off social media and rarely weighing in on much beyond the show itself. Even the biggest Breaking Bad fan could be forgiven for not knowing what Gilligan looks like. Unfortunately, this next Easter egg requires that you do. In a scene from the final season, Gilligan's face can be seen gracing Breaking Bad's money in place of Andrew Jackson. Does that mean Gilligan was one of America's first presidents in the Breakingverse? Yes, it does. That is now canon. This next one's for you big chemistry fans out there. From its opening sequence to many of its plot details, Breaking Bad often pulls cuts from deep in the periodic table. But this next Easter egg may be its most obscure reference ever. Breaking Bad ran for 62 episodes. And this isn't an arbitrary number. The 62nd element on the periodic table is samarium, element often used in chemotherapy to treat cancer. Could this be a coincidence? Possibly, but it's more interesting to imagine Gilligan and his team planning the entire arc of the show around a dumb chemistry joke. We wanted to highlight a not-so-subtle piece of foreshadowing in Season 5. In this scene, Walt checks out a bullet hole in the side of a car. This shot lines up the hole with the reflection of Walt's head, symbolizing that he will not make it out of this series alive. It seems obvious in retrospect, but it's easy to miss these details when you're wrapped up in the story of the show. Even one that's about as subtle as a bullet to the head. At least it's easier to watch than Jane's vomit jokes. Here's an interesting homage that plays into the show's obsession with color. In this scene from the 4th season, Jesse pulls a gun on Walt and they end up in a familiar position. The characters are posed almost identical to a scene from Reservoir Dogs, at a standoff between Harvey Keitel and Steve Buscemi. But there's more to it than that. The characters in Reservoir Dogs are named Mr. White and Mr. Pink, which is pretty darn close to Mr. White and Mr. Pinkman. It's a nice nod to a classic crime film. As you may already be able to tell, Breaking Bad really outdid itself with its Easter eggs in the final season. This reached ahead with Ozymandias, a dramatic, chaotic episode filled with Easter eggs, references, and interesting moments. One such moment comes after Walt kidnaps his own daughter Holly. In the scene, Holly calls out for her mother, causing Walt to realize that he has to return her. Amazingly, this line was not scripted. During a take, the baby playing Holly called out for her real mom. Nice ad-lib, baby. Soon after, Walt leaves Holly in a fire station, knowing she'll be returned to Skylar, but there's something else interesting happening. In the background, if you look closely, you can see a chessboard, which presumably was being played by some firefighters. On the board, the black pieces have surrounded the White King. This symbolizes that Walter White, a white kingpin, is about to lose his empire surrounded by enemies with nowhere to run. This background detail subtly lets us know that we are watching Walt's final stand. Another neat piece of symbolism occurs at the beginning of Ozymandias, with the loss of Hank Schrader. If you recall, Hank is shot and falls into a hole in the desert, never to be seen again. What you may not recall is that Walter dug that hole himself when he was attempting to hide his barrels full of cash. Symbolically, Walt is responsible for Hank's fate, and he literally dug his grave. This is the moment when Walt is first directly confronted with what he has done. Continuing on to the final episode, we have this shot of a New Hampshire license plate. It's hard to come up with a more boring sentence than New Hampshire license plate, but with this close-up, the show implies a connection between the slogan and the fate of its main character. The slogan and the two options it presents can easily be taken to connect the journeys of Walt and Jesse. Jesse, controlled by Walt, and then Todd, is finally allowed to take the first option, while Walt takes the latter. We're all familiar with the dreaded double entendre, but the title of the final episode of Breaking Bad, Felina, tries the ever-ambitious triple entendre. The most literal meaning comes from the song El Paso, a song Walt listens to in the final episode. The song is about a wanted man who comes back to town to find the woman he loves. Much like a hunted Walter returns to New Mexico to fix his affairs. The second meaning is that Felina is an anagram for finale, symbolizing the end of the show. The third is a bit complicated. When you break up the title into Felina, the elements of the periodic table it refers to loosely translate into blood, meth, and tears. Well played, Breaking Bad writers. Breaking Bad was not done dropping Easter eggs, even as the credits of the final episode rolled. The song Baby Blue plays during Walter's final moments, and its lyrics cleverly allude to the story. The song is originally about a man who pines for his lost love, but in the context of the series, the lyrics sound like an ode to Walter's blue meth. Guess I got what I deserved, kept you waiting there too long, my love. All that time without a word, didn't know you'd think I'd forget or I'd regret that special love, the special love I have for you, my baby blue. Another interesting thematic parallel occurs in the very last shot of the show. It's a shot from above as Walter is splayed out on the ground. The shot is the end of Heisenberg's journey as he has closed the books on his empire and tried his best to tie up loose ends. But the shot echoes another famous shot, when Walt finds his basement crawlspace empty and begins laughing maniacally. Thematically, that was the end of Walter White when Walt truly became Heisenberg. The final shot of the show shows Heisenberg's journey is done. The end wasn't the end, of course. A few years after Baby Blue eulogized Heisenberg, we found out exactly what became of Jesse after he stole that El Camino and made a break for it ahead of the police. Naturally, the sequel movie is also riddled with Easter eggs and references. El Camino got right into reminding us of the things we lost in the end. Specifically, Walt's stubborn DEA brother-in-law Hank and his partner Steve Gomez. A panning shot of the DEA office has portraits of the two DEA agents that fell victim to the collapse of the Heisenberg meth empire. Now let's talk about an episode which happened all the way back in season 2 called Peekaboo. In the very beginning of the episode, Jesse Pinkman is standing alone and he sees a huge beetle on the sidewalk. He helps it along right before his pal Skinny Pete shows up and crushes it. The episode continues with a lot more drama and action, but this scene was a meaningful one to many viewers. Jesse showing kindness to an insignificant insect highlights that he's always been a defender of the innocent. It also ties into later in the episode when he comes face to face with a young boy living with abusive and neglectful parents. So when we saw Jesse and the bug again in El Camino, of course, we couldn't help but think of this famous scene from the show. This episode also earned Aaron Paul a nomination for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Drama Series. During Breaking Bad, Walter White teaches Jesse many things. Many of them are absolutely terrible, but at least they're useful. Well, useful when it comes to committing crimes, skirting the law, and not getting caught. Hey, he teaches a lot more than science, that's all we're saying. One of the first lessons Jesse learns from Walt is to be inconspicuous instead of flashing his wealth around in the form of fancy cars. A lesson that Walt later abandons when he buys Walt Jr. a flashy new Dodge Challenger. But still, in Breaking Bad, Jesse drives an old red Toyota Tercel that looks like it's definitely seen some better days. This car somehow miraculously survived from the end of Breaking Bad to the movie El Camino. Well, not the exact same car that he used. That one sold at auction for a buttload of money, and a portion of the proceeds went to a charity helping those suffering from addiction. Jesse Pinkman is a man with a less than impressive dating resume, not because he has trouble getting girls, but just seems to have trouble keeping them alive. Poor Andrea was a woman he met in an NA meeting. It turned out that her younger brother Tomas was the kid who took out Jesse's friend Combo in an earlier episode. Sadly, neither Tomas nor Andrea ultimately survived their association with Jesse, although Andrea's son, Brock, lived. He went through some serious issues when he was poisoned by Walter White, who was trying to manipulate Jesse. Although they may be gone, they're not forgotten, because we saw photos of them in El Camino. Brock is mentioned but doesn't actually return. It might have been nice to see him again, but considering the time gap between the end of Breaking Bad and the filming of El Camino, it's understandable that the child actor had grown too much during that time. In case you forgot, Jesse goes through some pretty terrible stuff over the course of Breaking Bad, as in gets kidnapped and tormented bad. He's forced to cook and is attacked when he doesn't obey. By the time he and Walt reunite, it's clear Jesse has sustained some serious injuries during his time in captivity. These are the scars we see on his body and head during El Camino, a sad reminder of the horrible things Jesse has had to withstand in order to survive. Yes, he committed no shortage of crimes during his time on the show, but he also suffered a great deal. Poor Jesse is scarred both on the inside and out thanks to getting involved with Walter White in the first place. Although he ultimately escaped his captors at the end of Breaking Bad, will he ever be able to truly escape? Just like Felina dipped with symbolism, the title of the movie itself double dips on the title. Obviously it refers to the getaway vehicle, but when you translate the name of the car, you get The Road, to tell the story of the road out of the Heisenbergian nightmare Jesse was in. It's a franchise world and we're just living in it. And that means that any good story might just need a story about a side character's origin. While sometimes that means we get the answer to the question nobody asked, like, where did Han get his pistol and last name? It can also end up being a series that does the seemingly impossible. You get that by putting the show on the capable shoulders of an actor like Bob Odenkirk in the prequel series Better Call Saul. And as is the custom, riddled with Easter eggs and references. Lalo Salamanca isn't so much an Easter egg as he is the happiest bad guy just this side of Tuco when it comes to the Breaking Bad universe. Over the last seasons of Better Call Saul, Lalo is the smiling menace that haunts Jimmy in his transition to Saul Goodman, until he finally kills Howard Hamlin and enlists Saul and Kim in killing his rival Gus Fring. In the world of scary bad guys, Lalo is scary enough that even Gus gets the drop on Lalo. Saul clearly doesn't feel free of his terror, asking if Walt and Jesse were sent by Lalo in his first appearance on Breaking Bad. According to creator Vince Gilligan, he had to be talked into including Lalo by the writer's room, a decision he's happy he made. Before Walter White broke bad, Jesse was already ankle deep in the badness as the meth dealer Captain Cook. You gotta have a cool nickname, I guess. Walter drags the often reluctant Jesse to the big time, which means leaving behind his Captain Cook persona. During Better Call Saul, when Saul makes a phone call, you can see that Jesse is already in business, as his Captain Cook tag decorates the payphone. Looking for businesses to launder his drug money, Walter suggests buying a car wash he rage quit in the first episode at the suggestion of Skyler. Trying to talk him out of the car wash and into the laser tag place, Saul gives Walter a lesson in being shady. Any lie will work as long as you believe the lie. To punctuate that, he mentions the time he hooked up with a woman by pretending to be Kevin Costner. What was a cheeky reference to Bob Odenkirk's passing resemblance to the Waterworld star became a true story when early in the first season, we actually meet the woman he conned into thinking she was going home with the man who brought us The Postman. He's also done some good movies too, but I still love The Postman. By the end of Breaking Bad, things have, well, broken rather badly for just about everybody. That means that Saul has to give up his lavish, shady lawyer lifestyle to go on the run. Before he can do that, he has to spend his last bit of time with the wrecking machine that is Walter White. When talking about his future, it's not Belize that he sees for himself, but a Cinnabon in Omaha, Nebraska. Turns out he read the ticket, because when we pick up Saul post Breaking Bad in the bleak black and white future, he is managing a Cinnabon in Omaha, Nebraska. Just because Saul, Walter, Fring, and company are epic levels of shadiness and ill intent, that doesn't mean that they are the only despicable people in Albuquerque. When Saul is introducing Kim to the dark side of working cons, their target is an arrogant stockbroker named Ken. Ken the stockbroker doesn't let being conned get to him apparently, because the next time he's seen, he's driving a BMW with the personalized plates. Ken wins. Being a BMW driver, he's naturally a bit of a tool and cuts into a parking lot spot that Walter was going for and waving Walter off while talking on his Bluetooth. Walter runs into him again at a garage, still babbling into his Bluetooth, so Walter takes the opportunity to bridge the connection on his car battery with a squeegee, setting the car on fire. The engine of Breaking Bad is the excuses Walter makes at each step of his journey that is meant to allow him to continue to think that he's still a good guy. The first step is the need for money to provide for his family after his untimely death from lung cancer. Being a man of science, Walter is very specific. He needs $737,000. It was not enough. When Saul, as Gene, starts running a scam with the cab drivers that figure out who he is, one of the targets that almost restores Jimmy's conscience is a Mark who has cancer. When Jimmy goes to collect what the cabbie wouldn't, we find out that this cancer patient hasn't broke bad because he already had $737,000. Speaking of Mike, he's a man of simple habits. In both shows, he shows a preference for the pimento cheese sandwich, the caviar of the South. It's what he's carrying instead of a gun in the episode Pimento of Better Call Saul. And it's what he gives Jesse in Breaking Bad when he joins Mike on a stakeout. When he's not packing his own lunch, he spends his time at Loyola's family restaurant. Since butter won't melt in Saul's mouth, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the knee problem he brings up to avoid physical confrontation or labor is an affectation, part of his persona. In an intimate moment with Walter that we see in the finale of Better Call Saul, we find out that he messed up the knee by going too hard on his first slip and fall. When Saul gives that as his one regret, Walter surmises that Saul has always been the way he is, something that will haunt him later. It's hard to believe in a world that has Walter White, Jesse Pinkman, Combo, Badger, and Skinny Pete, there is someone who is an even worse drug dealer, and it's not even close. That man is Daniel Wormald. He sells ill-gotten pharmaceuticals to Nacho and, not listening to Mike, is flashy with his cash. Naturally, that gets his house tossed by Nacho and his guys, and his baseball card stolen. Apparently, Daniel recovers because he goes on to be the Danny that Saul says makes his laser tag arena the best bet for money laundering. Or he's a psychic vampire named Colin Robinson. Jesse and Walter never quite agreed on the best way to do business. One of their chief disagreements is where to do business. Walter chooses a junkyard free from prying eyes. Jesse stresses that prying eyes work to their advantage. After complaining about the location, Walter asks him where they should be doing business. Jesse says that half of his business was conducted at Taco Cabeza because no one gets murdered at Taco Cabeza. Turns out it's also a place for Kim and Saul to go for some post-shenanigan eats when Kim mentions there's one around the corner. Jimmy's first law office leaves a lot to be desired as it's in the back of a nail salon located at 160 Juan Tabo Boulevard. There are two noteworthy things about that address. The first is that it's down the street from 6353 Juan Tabo Boulevard. The residence of Gale, the kindly chemist Gus tried to have replace Walt and Jesse. The other noteworthy thing about that office is the Day Spa Nail is a real nail salon. That's a distinction it shares with the Loyola Family Diner. When we meet Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad, he is a shady lawyer at the height of his powers with splashy TV ads and his splashy 1997 Cadillac with custom plates that read "Lawyer Up." As a way to demonstrate that, we'll be telling the story of Saul before the Cadillac. The first episode features a white 1997 Cadillac in a parking lot with Jimmy walking towards it, only to get in the ratty Suzuki Esteem that indicates Jimmy's self-esteem might be in rough shape. Because the name of the car is the name of a feeling. I'm a genius. Ice Station Zebra is three things. It is a 1968 spy movie on a submarine and the titular research station and the hunt for Russian spy photos taken with stolen technology. Ice Station Zebra is also the name of one of Saul's shell companies that he uses to shuffle money around. In Better Call Saul, we also find out it's Kim's father's favorite movie that she watches to think of him. Aww. Sometimes production will hide things in the shows or movies that they assume will just be for them. But if someone discovers it, they'll get a special message. But this is the internet times. So when there's a hidden message in the episode titles of season 2, the internet was able to decode the message everyone had been waiting for. The first letter of each episode spelled out Fring's back. Whew, we did it. We broke bad, broke away, and even went all the way back to the Breaking Bad before the Breaking Bad. The takeaway is the Albuquerque drug scene is really intense, but their cell service is impeccable. No matter how deep in the desert, plenty of bars to get you out of and into trouble.